Welcome to Therapy Explained, where we explain, demystify, and destigmatize mental health and mental health treatment. My name is Deniss. I'm a licensed therapist and the owner of a mental health group practice in California that supports the mental health needs of BIPOC adults in individual and couples therapy. And here at Therapy Explained, I am your host. Before we jump into the video, remember to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I post videos on all things mental health, and if you find this video helpful at any point, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Also, just a quick thank you to everybody who's been leaving those very kind and supportive comments. It again means a lot to me to know that I am being another additional help or tool for you in your mental health journey, which I know can be lonely and difficult and challenging. You're not alone. Thank you for sharing your stories. Thank you for continuing to support this channel. Again, I'm happy to hear that I can support you as well and that you continue to find these videos helpful. This video idea actually came from someone who asked, what do I do if I'm having challenges with maintaining my boundaries? So if you're ever wondering, can you make a video about this? Go ahead and leave it in the comments down below. Now, I am not your therapist, so I can't speak to your unique experience. I try to make these videos as general as possible so that you can try to apply the things that feel applicable to you. And of course, I can't do any processing if you do end up sharing your stories. However, if I do find some topics like this that I think could be useful for all of us, I'll go ahead and make a video about it. So if you think, I think this can be definitely helpful for me and probably for other people, again, leave it down in the comments below. And if you want to and feel called to share your story, I'm also not going to discourage you against doing that. But again, remember, I'm not able to help you process those things. It would be unethical for me and really impossible for me to help you do that through the comment section, which is also why I leave you with some helpful referrals and resources in the description below. So go ahead and check that out if you're thinking, you know what, I actually could use some help with processing this stuff. I, of course, run a group practice, so we are an option for you if you live in California, but my favorite directories are down there so that you can find a therapist that fits you wherever you may be. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's just go ahead and jump into the video. Revisit your idea of boundaries. One of the things that trips us up the most is a misunderstanding of what boundaries are. Again, if you would like a refresher on what boundaries are in the first place and how to get started in setting them, go ahead and check out those videos. But as a refresher, let's talk about what boundaries are meant to be. When you're setting boundaries and communicating them and then also maintaining them, it's important for you to remember that boundaries are not meant to dictate what other people's behaviors will be. Mostly they are communicating what you are going to do in response to other people's behaviors. It can be helpful to be compassionate and recognizing that it's possible that the other person's not aware of how they are affecting us, but ultimately what we are communicating to them is, hey, this doesn't feel safe or comfortable for me. And so when it happens, or if you engage in it, right, I'm going to do this. That's really essentially what a boundary is, right? I have some worksheets on my group practice website where you can download and practice some of this stuff. I have some guides on how to actually communicate a boundary, like a sentence structure for it. But it typically sounds like, I feel this way when you do this. Then you make a request, like, I would like for this behavior to change like this. However, that's more of a request and you can't really dictate what the other person is doing. The key part is saying, and if that's not possible, right, this is how I'm going to respond. Again, it can vary how you want to communicate these boundaries. It all depends on the situation. Some situations call for us to be very firm and not so flexible. Others can allow us to have conversations about things that are making us uncomfortable. So again, depending on the person and the situation. And you might be able to reach a compromise, or the other person may be able to hear that and adjust. However, at the end of the day, if you're having trouble maintaining your boundary because perhaps you've told somebody that if they do something that you're not going to be able to talk to them or spend time with them, and then you're having a hard time because you're expecting them to change their behavior, but you're still talking to them when they don't, that's the piece that you're responsible for. Let's say, for example, that your parent brings up a subject that is extremely painful for you, and you've already stated, Mom, Dad, I'd rather not talk about this stuff. It makes me feel really uncomfortable. But your parent keeps doing that, keeps bringing this up, or keeps saying certain things. You might feel frustrated in maintaining your boundary because you keep saying, well, I've already told them not to bring that up. And every time I come over, they bring it up and then we end up talking about it or we end up fighting. Well, you made a request and you try to let them know how you felt. However, you are responsible for whether or not you're engaging in this conversation. Because perhaps the boundary needed to be, I'm not comfortable with this conversation. And the next piece is telling them what you are going to do if they engage in this behavior. And of course, we want to take our culture into account. Sometimes most of the time, we're probably not going to talk to our parents and say, like, I'm not okay with you talking about this. I'm going to walk away. But if you are, that's also good. Most of us might have a hard time saying something like that, and culturally might not be acceptable to do so. So learning how to be a little bit more firm with our boundaries, especially with our parents, will take time, will take practice, and is also a very individual experience. So perhaps the conversation is more like, these things hurt me, Mom, or, when you say stuff like this or bring this stuff up, it makes me uncomfortable. And I don't think that I can really sit through this conversation. So if you do bring it up, I'm gonna most likely change the subject, or I think I'm just gonna walk away. Okay, Mom, I can't talk about this anymore. Or perhaps this is a boundary that you don't feel comfortable explicitly expressing just yet. And so then that means that you have to hold yourself responsible for that unspoken piece, right? Letting them know, I'm just not comfortable with this conversation. And if they do bring it up, it is on you to change the subject or to excuse yourself from the conversation. You could say, Mom, this is something that I said I wasn't comfortable with, so I'm gonna go home now. Or you could just say, Mom, it's actually getting a little late, or I have a meeting, or I got something to do, so I'm gonna go, right? So these are several different ways. So these are several ways in which you can set and maintain this boundary. Depending on how safe you feel, you might be explicitly saying, hey, this is what I'm going to do if you don't maintain this boundary, or if you don't respect my boundary, this is what I might do. But you're still holding yourself responsible for that piece. And I think that that's the biggest change. So revisit your idea of boundaries and remember that ultimately what they are is your responsibility, and you're expressing what you are going to do in response to behaviors that don't feel safe, appropriate, or comfortable for you. Identify the feeling. Okay, so we're clear on what boundaries are. You're starting to establish, okay, if this behavior occurs that I'm not comfortable with, I've decided that I'm going to take this action. Now you've either explicitly expressed that to somebody or have now committed yourself to changing how you engage in this dynamic that doesn't feel good. The next piece is that might still be difficult to do. And so one of the ways in which you can ease this transition and the practice of getting into boundaries is identifying the feeling that comes up for you when you try to practice that boundary. So that behavior piece, right? Again, whether you've explicitly said that to the other person or you're just holding yourself responsible for that part of it. You might feel afraid that if you do walk away, if you do excuse yourself from the conversation, the other person might get upset, or they might reject you. They might not want to speak to you again. You might feel perhaps a little bit guilty, feeling like, this person really wants to connect with me, or I know that they mean well and I feel bad just setting this boundary because I'm uncomfortable. So there could be a number of different emotions that are coming up for you all at the same time, and that can be really overwhelming. But if all you're feeling is, this is overwhelming, I don't like it, you're more likely to walk away from it. Instead, what can be helpful is to take a step back and identify that feeling. What am I feeling? What am I trying to run away from? What am I trying not to feel? Once you know what that feeling is, try to identify what the thought is that follows that feeling. If it's fear, I feel afraid, the thought that might be connected to that could be, I'm afraid that this person will be mad at me. I'm afraid that this person might not want to talk to me again. I'm afraid that other people will think I'm cruel or cold, right? So what am I afraid of? I feel guilty. What I feel guilty about? I feel guilty that this person might feel hurt because I walked away from the conversation. I feel guilty that, again, right? So you try to identify the feeling, and then what is the thought that's connected to that feeling? Because once you have both of these pieces, that's going to help you address this discomfort with the boundary in the first place. Remind yourself of your why. That uncomfortable feeling will most likely get you to run away from establishing your boundary or maintaining your boundary. But if you can sit with yourself and remind yourself of why you're doing this in the first place, it'll ground you back into your reason for doing this. So if you chose to set this boundary, there must have been something that was calling you to do so. There's a part of you that knows that this is a way that you're going to feel safer and probably better in the long run, even if it's uncomfortable at first. But when we lose sight of that, the reason I am walking away from this conversation is actually not because I'm trying to be mean or cold or punishing this other person, but because I genuinely feel so unsafe in these conversations or in this dynamic. And for my own well-being, I need to not be in it. Reminding yourself of your why will also bring you back to your motivation and to your drive for doing this in the first place, despite the discomfort. If ultimately part of this question of why am I doing this in the first place starts to make you question why you are doing this in the first place, that might be something to pay attention to. Is it further guilt now that you're feeling? Are you questioning that boundary because you're thinking, oh, is it really that important for me to feel safe and comfortable? I think that's also a conversation to continue to follow, right? Or a thought process for you to continue to follow. Because more than likely the answer is yes. You're allowed to create relationships in which you feel safe in. And other times we might also end up questioning the boundary by the way that we're establishing it. Perhaps the boundary doesn't need to be, I'm going to walk away from the house when this subject comes up. Maybe I can just walk away from the room. Maybe I could just go to the restroom for a second and come back. Or maybe I don't need to walk away. Maybe I feel comfortable and safe enough to just change the subject instead, or call attention to how uncomfortable I'm feeling in that moment. So you can also experiment with the way that you're establishing your boundary by still following what feels safe to you. Practice self-soothing. So this is a core element of your mental health, regardless of what you're working on, is learning how to soothe your body and how to soothe your mind. I have a few videos on how to develop coping skills and why those are so important, but this is the moment in which they come in. You can start to use the tools that you've developed, ideally in therapy, to help you feel safer. Because again, in that moment, you might feel uncomfortable. You might have a lot of uncomfortable feelings, right? That fear, that guilt, that dread of having to set and maintain your boundaries. And so the next piece is taking care of your body. You might have a lot of catastrophizing thoughts, but your body's reacting to those catastrophizing thoughts. So whatever your soothing activity is, whether that's going for a walk or coloring or taking deep breaths, or perhaps you want to engage in something that helps distract you a little bit more, like listening to music or reading or switching to an activity that calls your attention to something else and not what you're afraid of. Perhaps it's a combination of both. Maybe you need to do a little bit of soothing and then a little bit of distracting. And that's totally fine. Find the combination that works best for you and try to soothe your body as well as your mind. Some people also find it helpful to practice affirmation statements. So I have a few of those, again, on my practice website, specifically for boundaries, if you want to go ahead and purchase that. But you can find them all over the place, on Pinterest, on Instagram. You can find them here on YouTube, I'm sure, to help you remind yourself of the reason that you're doing this, and that you do, after all, at the very end of the day, have a right to develop relationships that feel safe to you. Accept the discomfort. Okay, I know this piece isn't exactly what we love to hear, but part of this journey is accepting that you're going to feel uncomfortable sometimes. Setting boundaries and maintaining them feels uncomfortable. Most of the time it might even feel wrong, and that's mostly because it's new. Depending on the way that you were raised, and particularly if you're a BIPOC adult, you're probably going to feel some of that guilt. You might feel like, oh, this feels just wrong, and maybe I'm doing the wrong thing. Maybe it is me. And sometimes you might even get that message from the people around you, especially your family, that family is supposed to be everything and you can't really set boundaries with family. Except that you absolutely can, because setting boundaries means that you're establishing relationships with someone that feels safe to you. And shouldn't family relationships feel safe? These are definitely the kind of relationships, the loving relationships that we should be having with our families. And boundaries are a way to do that. I know that it might feel wrong. And yeah, sometimes the way that we might think about them, just individualistic and creating these spaces between us and other people, can get into the extreme. But when we take into account our culture and our personal values, we can still develop boundaries that align with that. This is why the journey is so individual. It's up to you to decide what is going to feel good, how firm your boundaries need to be, and where they need to be, as well as how they need to be established for you. Which leads me to my bonus point: seek support. Again, the point of this channel is to give you information about mental health so that you can feel empowered to make better informed decisions about your mental health and about your life. But that doesn't mean that this journey can really be done all on your own, because it really can't. This journey is difficult, it's challenging, and it can be lonely. And if you have someone, particularly a mental health professional, helping you through this, it can be easier. A lot of the things that we talk about might be particularly triggering for you. There's a lot of little details and nuances to your personal experience that I cannot talk to. But if you have someone that you speak with every week that can get to know who you are and what your values are, and help you experiment and tweak a lot of these interventions to fit you specifically, then you'll start to make progress. Then it'll feel right, and it can make a world of a difference. So seek support if you feel that you're ready for it. So I hope that today's video was helpful in getting you to start to maintain and affirm some of your boundaries. I know this part is challenging, most of the journey is. And again, calling back to that piece, if you need extra support, please go ahead and search for it. I've left some resources for you down below. They're linked in all of my videos, so if at any point you feel ready to seek extra support, check them out. And before we say goodbye, if you found this video useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one.